At the start of the year, the Grendel invaded Feroz, quickly conquering Oran Sarai and the Khazar Straits and moving to complete their dominance of the coastal regions by capturing Font Argenta. They have not come with armies, but with their armada, a great swarm of warships, marines, sailors, and mercenaries that quickly crushed resistance on the islands and then swept down the eastern Brass coast. During the spring equinox, Grendel's sorcerers attempted to raise the spirits of the drowned on the haunted isle of Ossonai. Had they been successful, the ghosts of thousands of orc pirates, buccaneers, and raiders would have formed a fearsome spectral army and rampaged across Feroz alongside their living descendants. Luckily, the heroes of the Empire were able to make use of the Sentinel Gate to put a stop to their audacious plan and exorcise the ghosts bound to the island by the Ossonai Sutaneer. Many of the priests who tended the island were lost, however. Slain or enslaved by the Grendel, they are no longer able to carry out their sacred task of quieting the restless shades of those lost in the Bay of Katazar. Once the Grendel are dealt with, there will be time to consider what this might mean for the future, for now there are more important considerations. The Grendel Armada has uncontested control of Oran Sarai and the Khazar Straits, and of the prosperous coastal towns of Iran, Johara, Khazar, Shantarim. This is a reason for some concern, especially their control of Oran Sarai. The Skoriro is particularly wide where it runs past Surok into the bay. It is crossed by bridges, but now the Grendel control the southern ends of those bridges. A land force seeking to enter Feroz from Madruga must cross those bridges, and while the Grendel control them, it would not be possible to get past without fighting. Worse, the Grendel have demonstrated in the past their willingness to close avenues of approach to territories they control, the passes of Spiral, for example, or their assault against the Spider's Dream. If the Grendel destroyed the bridges across the Skoriro, it would not be feasible for armies to travel between Madruga and Feroz. They would need to go through Segura to enter the territory. The Orcs control most of the Freeborn coast and continue to oppress the people of the Brass coast. While they are not rounding up the population wholesale, Orc slavers can pick and choose who to chain and drag back to waiting ships bound for the broken shore. There is much cruel humour among those slavers who talk about the need for fresh new slaves since the heroes of the Empire stole so many during their attack on Dubtraig and their raid on Beoride. They are careful only to enslave or rob Imperial citizens, however. The small Asavean population that remains are left unmolested. Some, perhaps inspired by the example of the priests of Barlow and the Black Bull, take advantage of this to offer sanctuary to freeborn friends as best they can. A very few even risk transporting hidden refugees out of Feroz to safety in Madruga and Sarvos, usually in return for a great deal of money. The temple remains closed to the Grendel. Astonishingly, they still allow Asavean merchants and sailors to visit it, even those clearly planning to trade with the Empire. Indeed, there are rumours coming north with these merchants that Lord Rahab, the new Orc governor of Feroz, is encouraging the priests to preach openly of their gods to any who will listen. "We are not the Empire," he is reported to have said. "We respect your freedom to speak of your faith, and we are not afraid of your words." A few priests have taken him up on his offer, some travelling as far afield as Shantarim and Khazar. In addition to preaching, they also bring back news of the other settlements, and of the progress of the war. Despite their defeat at Ossonai, the Grendel invasion continues. They press on to attack the islands and shores of Font Argenta, launching their first raid against Brahma within a week of the spring equinox. The defenders hold out as best they can, desperate for aid from the rest of the Empire. A trade hub of sorts, Brahma is perhaps best known as a stopping-off point between the Iron Confederacy and the wider Empire. Since the Imperial Senate imposed sanctions on Sarani traders, and since the Southern Dukes declared an embargo on Imperial goods in retaliation, there have been few travellers coming north from the Confederacy. When the Grendel close in on Brahma, those Sarani citizens who remain simply pack up their belongings and depart for the border. It is noted by some observers that the Grendel do not make much effort to intercept them or take their valuables. Suspicion is rife that the Iron Confederacy has made some sort of deal with the Orcs of the Broken Shore. At first it seems unlikely, but then they did make a military pact with the Jotun to conquer the Lasambran Hills. Surely the history of violence between their two nations would make any lasting treaty impossible. As with the matter of the Isle of the Ossonai, the question of Sarani diplomacy is soon superseded by more immediate concerns. Luckily, the people of Pharos are not forced to weather the Grendel storm alone. The strong reeds and quiet steppe have come east from Segura, pausing briefly to ensure the spice gardens are secure, and then marching towards the coast to intercept the Grendel. They are quickly joined by the Bounders, fresh from Verlow in the Mormold, having travelled past Fort Braden and down through the Cinnabar Hills to Morajassi. The journey is not easy. The gentler route through Tasato and along the banks of the Vassa is closed to the Marcher army now that the Grendel control Oran Sarai. Shaking the thick red dust from their boots, the Bounders meet up with their fellows in the reeds and take stock. Both Marcher armies are exploring new strategies. They have barely had time to adjust to the changes before being thrust into the thick of things. There is much talk of boundaries and of making the most of the terrain, but the Grendel are already in Pharos, and the freeborn territory is composed almost entirely of rolling grasslands and islands, neither of which lend themselves to guerrilla tactics. Instead, the armies split their attentions. The strong reeds press into On Sarai while the Bounders move to engage the Grendel forces attacking Fontargenta. For their part, the quiet steppes separate their forces, supporting both Marcher armies. They bring with them the cunning tactics of the Navarre, selective strikes against valuable opponents, envenomed blades, and the careful use of poison and fire to attack the Grendel supply lines and caches of provisions. They liberally share their cunning with their allies. There always seems to be an apothecary ready to provide a hand, with something special to smear on their halberds, or a band of scouts who have identified the perfect location from which to launch volleys of arrows on unsuspecting orcs. With their assistance, the Imperial forces are able to kill a number of important targets among the Grendel forces, including many healers and magicians, and a handful of beast tamers, and one of the Grendel's powerful quartermasters. Some of the Marcher soldiers tell stories of peculiar allies who supposedly fight alongside the Navarre of the quiet steppe in Pharos. Close-mouthed battle magicians who wield venom and curse with cruel precision. Swift-footed creatures with deadly fangs and tearing claws, their faces concealed beneath thick veils and heavy cowls. Even stories of dog-sized scorpions that emerge from the shadows and fight alongside the heirs of Turuniel, frenziedly attacking the drakes and warbeasts of the Grendel with wicked pincers and dripping stingers. For their part, the Navarre neither confirm nor deny the presence of these unsettling companions, and simply change the subject. The Imperial forces are further supported by nearly a score of warbands led by independent captains, primarily Marchers but with a strong contingent of winterfolk among their number. The initial base of operations is established around a site of Mora's Rock, the incomplete fortification that squats above the town of Mora in Morajassi. It is very nearly finished and partially garrisoned, but the soldiers here must focus their attention on protecting the construction site. It would be a tragic loss if the Grendel were able to push past and attack the fort before its walls and keep are completed. Eastern Pharos is much more densely populated than Segura, at least near the coast. The bulk of the fighting takes place not amid rolling grasslands, but in towns and villages, or on the well-maintained roads that connect them. The Grendel seem unprepared for the presence of Imperial forces approaching from the west, and the Empire makes several quick gains. Does not last, however. The Orcs, it seems, have arranged the bulk of their defensive force along the northern coast, watching the approach to Sarok, awaiting an invasion from Madruga. With characteristic discipline, they quickly refocus their efforts against the strong reeds. The Marcher advance falters and is then slowly pushed back westward. At the same time, the Marines and mercenaries pushing through Fontargenta continue their relentless assault. The Bounders clash 3 times in bloody battles, winning one of the engagements but being forced to retreat in the other 2. In the end, they join up with the retreating Strongreeds and the rest of the Navarre at Brahma and make a stand. 2 days of vicious fighting ensue. The Marcher bill blocks and archers rain death on the approaching Grendel, but their positions are overrun one after another by disciplined orcs and savage landsharks. The main strength of the Grendel is their navies, and they are simply able to bring too many troops to bear too quickly and resupply those troops too efficiently for the Imperial armies to hold out. On the morning of the 3rd day, the order is given to abandon Brahma to the Grendel. Some freeborn are able to retreat with the Imperial armies, others choose to take their chances with the Grendel in the hope that the Empire will liberate their towns sooner rather than later. Another rich trading port falls to the Grendel. It encounters the same fate as the other wealthy towns along the bay. Its valuables are looted, and its citizens become prey for the Grendel slave-takers. Not all the Grendel forces are focused on conquest, however. A significant number of them are more interested in securing the wealth of Pharos and transporting it back to the coast. They range farther afield than their compatriots engaged directly with the Imperial forces, making probing raids against Afar and Mora. A few adventurous warbands strike as far west as the Spice Gardens. They are not interested in conquest, in taking and holding land, but in looting and stealing as much as they can before retreating back to the main Grendel forces. That is not to say that they are cowards. There are pitched battles between Grendel contingents and the Imperial armies, but they retreat as soon as the fight begins to turn against them, fleeing with their ill-gotten loot back towards the ships that will take it far away from the Brass Coast. As the summer solstice draws near, the Grendel have almost, but not quite, secured the whole of Font Argenta. Imperial troops are still billeted in the east, however, not far from the town of Afar and the borders of Afar Jassi. If those defenders had not been present, the Grendel would have easily conquered Font Argenta, and with it the entire territory of Feroz. But they could not have pushed any further. Even if Feroz had remained defenceless, to a degree this exposes a weakness in the Grendel strategy here. Their reliance on their ships allows them to conquer the coast and the islands, but the marines and soldier sailors of the Grendel Armada would be unable to make any headway into Mora Jassi or Afar Jassi. While their naval forces may be able to support their land forces, they have no chance of attacking the western regions of Feroz without boots on the ground. This season at least, there are no signs of those boots. If they had succeeded on the Isle of the Osseni, things might have been different, but they did not succeed. Indeed, if the Grendel had achieved even a sliver of success, if the Empire had been less committed to utterly preventing their rights, they might have raised enough spectres to make the difference here. Even a small force of shadows would have given them the weight of numbers needed to completely conquer Font Argenta. Likewise, if the armies fighting here had received less support from independent captains, not just Brahma, but the whole region would have been lost. Perhaps most ironically of all, had some of the Grendel forces been as committed to the conquest as their comrades, rather than looting the wealth of the freeborn, they would have captured Feroz. As it is, they are still not quite there, although they are very close. The fighting has been costly. All told, more than 1,500 Imperial soldiers are dead, or captured by the Grendel and carried away in chains. The Orcs themselves must have suffered similar casualties. Game information for Feroz. The Grendel control Oren Serai and the Khazar Straits and are 9/10 of the way toward conquering Font Argenta, and with it the territory. They also control both the officers of the Broken Shore Bounty and the Scorero nets. The one silver lining that exists is that while they are denying Ilium to the Empire, the Grendel are themselves not in a position to claim their own bounty of star metal. Unfortunately, without the officers in Khazar and Iran, there is nobody to organise the collection of more Ilium, and as such, nobody will get any Ilium until either the officers are reclaimed, or the Grendel conquer enough of the Scorero to be able to start panning for Ilium of their own. The Temple of Barlow and the Black Bull remains in occupied territory, and as such the Imperial delegate to the temple in Feroz will be unable to access their ministry. The temple still stands and is unmolested, and in the short term, at least, its conquest by the Grendel does not seem to have impacted Nemorian enthusiasm for Imperial trade. This outcome does have some implications for the previously released Wind of Fortune regarding Synod responses to the works of the Asavean architect. It is not feasible for the Faith to take action against the temple while Iran is under the control of the Broken Shore Orcs. The raiding and looting by the Grendel forces in Feroz means that production of personal resources for characters based in the territory have been reduced. Every character in Feroz has lost 2 ranks from the production of their personal resource this season, representing the damage done last season. They will suffer the same penalty next season due to the raids this season. If the Grendel continue to raid, that loss will continue until they stop, or steps are taken to protect the citizens of Feroz from their attack.